Welcome to day 5th of design thinking session. Today, we're going to look at the step 4th and 5th. The 4th step is prototype. The 5th step of the design thinking is testing your prototype. So there are a few techniques, like how do you come up with prototypes and how do you test those prototypes. That's what we're going to discuss in today's conversation. On the chart, you can very clearly see that we already covered early 3 stages, like empathize, define, ideation stage. So today we are in prototype, and then we'll discuss testing as well. So what is prototype? So once you have an idea, you're trying to translate that idea into tangible, or you make a small mock-up or simulation, or you create a beta version of it so that you can go and test it. So in simple way, prototyping is an early sample created to test a concept. Okay? So furniture designers, they start with a design, and then they start to create these miniature prototypes so that they can see that whether these are functionally stable or not. Since they will get a lot of this reading. So creating these samples, whether in a miniature version or in an actual size, it's very important to see that whatever idea you conceived, is it transferable? Is it coming out the way you're expecting it? Okay? So especially the car designer, they go extensively in terms of creating models. So when you conceive an idea, you start sketching, and then you start creating a clay model. And initially you create a small clay model, which then you go for actual size clay model. So like that, you try to see that your idea translating into reality. And this prototyping exists in a good amount of areas, whether you are a product designer or a car designer or a furniture designer or a printer. It's called a proof. It's a technical word. So you know that, like if you're publishing a book or a magazine, you take a proof. That's again a prototype. UI, UX people, they do prototype. Sometimes they do a hand sketch prototype. Sometimes they use a beta version of prototype. Why do they do? Because it helps them to test their power of their idea. Prototype is an early sample created to test a concept. Prototypes created in a design process are meant to evaluate your assumptions and accuracies. So what is prototype? Simply, the prototype is an early sample created to test a concept. And prototype created in the design process are meant to evaluate your assumptions and accuracies, or what you thought you were able to translate it or not. Likewise, it's basically you're testing design ideas, whether they can be brought into the physical world. And in a nutshell, the ideas are brought to life. The prototype, basically, it's kind of making your ideas tangible. Your ideas brought to life. So design thinking process prototype. Okay, why prototyping is so crucial in design thinking process? Usually, a good designer creates solutions with end users in mind. So if I'm a designer, I'm creating a brand or identity, I have to keep the end users, like how they perceive it. If I'm making branding for a fruit juice, and which is a pure or organic juice, so I have to give those cues where the consumer sense that what my brand stands for. So understanding their perceptions and understanding from their viewpoint, I need to design. So keeping user in the center, we design, okay? With a prototype, a designer can test their idea with the users and see what works and what isn't. So another benefit of prototype is that, like, when you give a prototype your targeted consumer in a test, that they will use it and then they will give a feedback. So that will help you as a solution provider, what is working, what is not working, okay? The feedbacks are very important to improve your design. So there are two types of prototypes. One is low fidelity, another is high fidelity prototype. So what is low fidelity prototype can mean? Basically, it's more basic, so in a raw shape. It's more conceptual. And low fidelity prototypes are most often won't be of the same material as the finished product. And generally, low fidelity prototypes involve materials like wood, paper, or plastic. So here you saw that this one, low fidelity, it's an app, but we're not using a software, we're using a paper, pen, and pencil to show that how that app functions, okay? And the fourth point is low fidelity prototypes are cheaply and quickly made, or just visualized how the end product looks. So it's a very quickly, roughly you make how it looks. More of a rough sketch or a rough mock-up so low fidelity prototyping, you can consider a storyboard is a low fidelity, and sketching is another part of a low fidelity technique. So low fidelity prototype, advantages and disadvantages. Advantages, anyone can make a low fidelity prototype regarding of experiential level, quick and cheap, of course. Can modify them very quickly, easily disposable. A designer can see a whole overview of solutions with minimal effort. It's not a resource-heavy activity. It doesn't require a lot of material, time, and tools and instruments. So it's a less costly or just easily can be manageable. Disadvantages, not realistic, and it's very basic. And prototypes lacks the look or feel of the final product. Of course, these are crude, so they lack that finesse or final look. So designers would probably have to explain a certain part of the features because these are very crude. Somebody needs to explain what it is or how it functions and give some background understanding regarding those prototypes. The second one is a high fidelity prototype. Here you can see that this is a website or app. They used the software to create those dummies. So high fidelity prototypes look more closer to the final product. So here these guys are developing app and you can see the functional app, okay? That's how, if it is launched, that's how you see in the market. This would give the user a closer experience with the final product. Like somebody testing a high fidelity prototype, it's like almost the end product. Like you must have saw that Tesla Cybertruck, okay? They brought that prototype on the stage and they drove that. And that's not a final produced thing. I think they made two prototypes, which are functional products, to give the look and feel of their coming Cybertruck products. So that's almost closer to their final product. Like if somebody is testing those cars, they feel that, oh, it's almost like 90% how their final products will be. High fidelity prototypes. So whenever you use technology, use material to print this prototype, you can consider them high fidelity. Basically going closer to the real products. Advantages and disadvantages of this particular prototype. Of course, advantages are it looks closer to the final product, and you get a much more better feedback because consumers are feeling as if they're using the final product, and then they can kind of tell you. Disadvantages, a cost involved, and there's a time as well. It's not like one over other. It's not like you just do only low fidelity or a high fidelity, and it depends upon if you're in a car design or innovation. So obviously you start with a low fidelity prototype. You'll start creating sketches. You try to bring your idea on the paper. Then you start moving towards your miniature version of that car, clay model it. And then you move towards doing it in an actual size, because now you want to see that area or a volume it takes and kind of wheel or tail light fits to that particular thing. So, and finally, you will be kind of making a prototype, which is a functional prototype. If you look at it, it's a low fidelity to a highest fidelity prototype. Obviously, it needs engineering intervention and a whole lot of things, and it's a costly thing compared to your sketching or compared to your miniature or compared to your clay model. Okay, so when you are designing a product, most of the time you start with a low fidelity, then you keep going up, and then you kind of produce one or two pieces like which are functional products, so that you can get a better idea about its functionality as well as usability of that product. So there are 8 ways to prototype. These are the ways we do a prototype. So the first thing first, the paper. Use of a paper in an interface design provides a more holistic experience by allowing the user to interact with multi-sheets at once and give them a greater insights into their object. So here you can see that how this person is using a paper to make a mock-up and show the functionality of this particular app. The storyboard process allows you to guide users through the entire user experience cheaply and effectively. Okay? Sketch and diagrams, like you do a lot of sketching and diagrams and show your idea. As I was earlier saying, the Lego, these bits you use to create different products to see that how that particular idea is getting manifested. Role play, wherein you enact, so try to see that how and what kind of response we're getting, okay? And physical model, obviously you kind of manufacture in a small quantity or use a 3D printer to kind of create the model. And Wizard of Oz prototype is a illusory based, means they are a fake and save time but give the same effect as a finished product. So what does it mean? Like, this is a gimbal, and this is actual size gimbal, but the buttons are not a functional buttons, but they are fake buttons, just to give a suggestion that here will be a button, like when you hold the gimbal, your thumb gets on this button and you can kind of use that button to navigate. So Yes, of course, you'll be having buttons, you'll be having all the dummy aspects on it, but they are not in the functional mode. And user-driven prototype, this is really interesting. Like you do kind of a workshop wherein you kind of gather your customers and try to use that particular platform to asking user to design. So when the users are creating solution for themselves, you'll start observing how they are coming up with solutions. Like what do they think the priority aspect in their solutions. So user-driven prototypes, instead of building a prototype to test on users, designers will ask users to create something, and that could be prototypes. So likewise, the paper interface, storyboard, sketch and diagram, Lego, and role play, and physical model using a 3D printer, and Wizard of Oz, a prototype like which looks like the final product and its size and everything, but those buttons and functionalities are fake. And lastly, use the end user them to make prototype and see that how they are making a prototype and what issue they are highlighting. So now we are coming to the last part of our design thinking process, like which is testing. Okay, what is the user test? User test, as you know, that any tests are meant to evaluate your outcome or the product or a feature with the end user. In this case, you're showing your prototype to the end user to test or evaluate the product's likability, features, and functionality. It all depends upon what is that you want to know from that tests. The usability testing is essential for many reasons. The most important is that it allows the design team to see where the product is flawed to address the problem before the final launching of it. So it's really kind of a testing wherein as a designer, as a product designer, we will get a lot of kind of feedback, and we'll come to know is there any flawed which needs to be addressed, and all those feedback really helps us to make a product better before we finally launch. And another thing is that in the user test, the designers observe, ask questions, and take note while the users carry out the task. So you give these sample products and ask them to use. While consumers are testing them, you observe and then you try to note down. Okay? Why do we need a usability test? Simple reason. User test gives you useful and valuable insights from your users regarding why and how they will use your product. So you'll come to know why and how, reasons for why they use it. Another reason is that you'll be better understand who your users are really and what they want to accomplish through using your products. So for example, I'm using this DJI Pocket 2 to record this video. So I'm a content creator, so I needed something very handy wherein I can record my content the way I'm doing it now without having 10 assistants to do this. So the DJI product is helping me to achieve this. I can do it myself, arrange everything myself, and get my content recorded. So DGI, when they kind of came up with this concept and they created a mockups, and then they had kind of provided these mockups to content creator like me to test. And when the content creator were happy with the quality, size, and whatnot, then those feedbacks taken by the designers, design team of DGI, and then they came up with the final product. Okay, let's look at next one. The user test session will be an invaluable opportunity for a designer to get real life feedback from their users. Very crucial for designers because they get a real life feedback from their users. At the end of the day, the user appreciating your product is very important because that's where the conversion happens. So conducting a user test, keep the goal in mind. The first one is to fix if there are any flaws. Another is to save time and money for the firm. So whenever we conduct the user test, it gives a good amount of feedback, and that's going to save, of course, time and money before we launch anything. Because once you launch the final product, then you start getting feedback and complaints about a product. That's going to cost a lot of money for the firm. So by doing prototypes and testing, you'll get a feedback so that you can fix their shortfalls. Another thing, cross-correct the assumptions made while designing a product. This is very critical. Through testing, we will kind of cross-correct some of our assumptions, what we made while designing the product. I might be thinking that people need something very handy while I'm designing, but when I create a mock-up or a prototype and test it, and people are not so much worried about being handy, but they are worried about the battery life, because they are ready to compromise on the size, but they are not ready to compromise on the battery life. So that means I have to more concentrate on a battery life than worrying about making it handy. The best practice of user tests, and what are those things we need to keep in our mind? We need to remember that we're testing prototype, not the user themselves. In usability tests, the user is always right. If something is too complicated or not working well, don't grow frustrated with the user, but understand that the product or service lacks intuitive design. So for example, in your consumer test, you have to respect the feedback what the consumers are giving rather than correcting them. And you need to understand that if they are saying that, oh, this is highly complicated, it doesn't mean you feel frustrated that these dumb users don't even know how to use it. No, you can't do that. So rather you should think that, oh, if the consumers are finding it difficult, that means my particular product doesn't lose the intuitive aspect, or it lacks intuitive design. How do you observe and note feedbacks? Make sure that you are not disturbing the user flow with the prototype, and find a way to collect feedback without interrupting the users. So how do you collect feedback while the testing is happening? Don't try to interfere the user by asking questions. You can ask a few questions, but you don't interrupt their flow. Let them use an experience, and you observe and take note without interrupting the users. Okay? How do you interact with the users? Make sure that you give the user some context. So when you're doing a test, or after that, if you're asking some question, try to build some context around, It's crucial the users feel in the loop and isn't left totally in the dark. Be aware not to over-explain. So for example, if I'm testing something, for example, this particular product, I might build some context around it. Okay, this is a comb, which is in a round shape. There are two fingers you can kind of slide in, and then it kind of, you comb your hair. I might build a kind of context around the usability of it and how important to carry a comb. So I have to build some context around, so that when users are interacting with your product, they don't consider this as a UFO, rather they consider it as a comb, and then they look at it from that particular perspective. So for example, there are a few guidelines while you're doing testing of your prototype. Let your user compare alternative. So while you're testing, let's have 2-3 prototypes with a slight variations, so that when user experience those A, B, C options, then they can kind of give you feedback like which one they felt more comfortable, which one they adored, which one they liked most. The second guideline is that avoid over-explaining. So while explaining, don't overkill it. Okay? If you explain too much, they might lose interest. So let them discover some of it. Okay? Ask user to talk about the experience. This is really critical because you will get an authentic feedback from them. When a user observe a prototype, ask them to say what they are thinking out loud to see how their mind is working. Further, it will help you to evaluate the efficiency of the solution you are testing with the prototype. So when you ask your consumers with whom you are testing, let them speak loudly, okay? Let them say things out loud to see how their mind is working, how they are conceiving the subject, and how they are perceiving the subject, okay? The fourth guideline is observe. Observe how users either correctly or incorrectly use a prototype and resist the urge to correct them. So generally when you're testing, if you're in that particular premises, just observe how people are using it. Yeah, some people are considering this particular button to put it on the machine, but that button is not meant for that. That you know, but that person doesn't know. He's trying it. Okay, don't jump and say that, oh, don't touch that button. That is not for switching on. Switch button is sideways. No. Ask follow-up questions. Ask a lot of follow-up questions to the users so everything feels clear on both ends, from your end as well as your consumer end. So that's it for today's session. So far, like on our 5-day sessions, like we kind of understood what is design thinking. We clearly know design thinking is a problem-solving tool. It helps you to solve the problem. So you kind of understand the problem, then you apply a thinking, 5-step thinking, then you come up with the solutions. We looked at empathize, define, ideate, explore, or prototype, or a mock-up making, or a testing. 5 stages we kind of looked into it. And in each of those stages, like we looked at it, certain tools and techniques like clustering, brainstorming, and 24 sutras of ideation technique. And we even looked at 2 types of prototyping, which is low fidelity and high fidelity. And in a certain industry, you start with a low fidelity, then you start moving towards a high fidelity prototyping. Finally, you test your prototype and see its likability and usability and desirability. So that's it. Thank you for listening.